Greetings, and welcome to A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. For this project, we are using the Ivan Walters reference book of 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Each day, we watch a movie associated with the date we are watching it on.
And as it is the 11th of June, we are going to be watching The Whole Wide World from 1996, directed by Dan Ireland and starring Vincent D'Onofrio. So to begin with, straight out, I had no idea the existence of this movie. Looking into it, I knew who the main character of Robert Howard was, but other than that, I did not know that there was a movie based around his life or the story that this story revolves around. That being said, not only does this movie, like I said, star Vincent D'Onofrio, but it also stars Renee Zellweger, Anne Wedgeworth, Harve Presnell, Benjamin Mouton, and Michael Colbert. In Texas in the 1930s, Pulp Fiction master Robert E. Howard, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, is introduced to Novelyn Price, played by Renee Zellweger, a teacher with aspirations of becoming a writer herself. They begin a relationship filled with conversation and imagination. Although the possibility exists of romance, Howard's obsession with his work and dedication to his sick mother, played by Anne Wedgeworth, leads Price to look elsewhere for love, leaving Howard feeling betrayed and alone. So the story is one of those sort of bittersweet kind of romances where the two characters never seem to figure out how to actually become a couple sort of thing. Something usually comes up or something else gets in the way, but we get a great performance out of Vincent D'Onofrio, who is fabulous always, and it's such a great thrill to see a performance of his that I have not seen before. And also Renee Zellweger doing a great performance as well. We don't have much of an actual surrounding cast, however, Anne Wedgeworth and Harve Presnell as Robert Howard's parents do a really great job at what the assignment is. As the movie progresses, we get a conversation between these two characters, which plays out through correspondence between the two of them as their lives continue on. Do a little bit of exploring through travel with one, the other doing her best at keeping her job and trying to go to school and whatnot. And again, a lot of it is back and forth through correspondence. However, unfortunately, Novelyn one day receives a telegram telling her that Bob Howard committed suicide in a very brief telegram, and that happens on June 11th, 1936, which is about an hour and 33 minutes into this hour and 51-minute movie. And as it is the 12th of June, we are going to be watching The Help from 2011, directed by Tate Taylor and starring Emma Stone. Once again, we're dealing with a cast that is put together that basically draws a very strong following to not only production but the actual release of this movie. Without a doubt, there is a lot of great talent that goes into this movie, but I unfortunately didn't get around to it, watching it until this particular program. And like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Emma Stone, but it also stars Viola Davis, Bryce Dallas Howard, Octavia Spencer, Jessica Chastain, Sissy Spacek, Allison Janney, and Mary Sternbergen. In the 1960s Mississippi, Southern social girl Skeeter, played by Emma Stone, returns from college with dreams of being a writer. She turns her small town on its ear by choosing to interview the black women who've spent their lives taking care of the prominent white families. Only Aberdeen, played by Viola Davis, housekeeper of Skeeter's best friend, played by Bryce Howard Dallas, will talk at first. But as the pair continue with their collaboration, more women decide to come forward. As it turns out, they have quite a lot to say. So one thing that I really do enjoy about doing this list is finally getting around to movies that I definitely should have already seen. And this is basically one of those. This is one that should have been at the very top of my list. This is, not only is it a very heartwarming story to begin with, but the stories that it encapsulates are just so beautifully demonstrated. This cast does a wonderful job, which is a huge, like, greatly female cast that are just a joy to watch. When we watch a movie with Viola Davis or an Octavia Spencer or an Emma Stone, we know what we're expecting from those characters. They play them beautifully to their fullest intentions. But when we hit a portrayal like Jessica Chastain does, it's so off of what you generally know that Jessica Chastain can do. It's just wonderfully done. And double that up when we're talking about Bryce Dallas Howard. The role that she plays as this woman who has this just attitude towards the world that is completely, knowing the actual actress herself, is like 180 from her personality, and to put such conviction behind her role is just a spectacular performance. And again, every single performance in this movie is just spectacular. This movie is filled with, like I said, warm, heart-wrenching moments, tragedy, a hell of a lot of humor. And again, it's something that I'm sorry that it took me this long to actually watch this movie. As part of the story with the racial unrest technically between the blacks and whites of America, part of this story has a through line of that, and it's on June 12th, 1963, when American civil rights activist Edgar Evers is assassinated as part of the telling of this story, which is about an hour and 20 minutes into this 2-hour and 26-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it ended up winning for Best Supporting Actress for Octavia Spencer, and it got nominated for Best Picture, Best Actress for Viola Davis, Best Supporting Actress for Jessica Chastain. And as it is the 13th of June, we are going to be watching Midway from 1976, directed by Jack Spit and starring Henry Fonda. Now, this is definitely one of those movies that I have seen in the past. I don't think I've seen it more than maybe twice. And I'm pretty sure one of those times there were scenes missing, because I'm pretty sure I saw it like on a Saturday afternoon, commercials and whatnot. And I believe just for timing, sequences were cut out. But like I said, not my first time, but it has been a while since I've seen the movie. And like I had mentioned, not only does this movie star Henry Fonda, but it also stars Glenn Ford, Edward Albert, James Coburn, Charlton Heston, and Hal Holbrook. So this is a dramatization of the Battle of Midway during World War II. A U.S. Navy Admiral Chester Nisbet, played by Henry Fonda, leads an outnumbered unit in the Pacific to break Japanese encryption codes. They soon discover that Admiral Yamamoto, played by Toshiro Mifune, plans to ambush the base on the land of Midway. Captain Matt Garth, played by Charlton Heston, helps devise the Navy's strategy, while his pilot son, Tom, played by Edward Albert, falls in love with a Japanese-American woman who is headed to an internment camp. Now, it is definitely one of those movies where every other face is familiar, whether you know the name, which a lot of big names are in this, plus a lot of up-and-coming names. This movie being filmed in the mid-70s, we have a lot of upcoming faces that become more familiar within the 80s and 90s, but we have a lot of classic actors, even a bunch more than what I had listed at the beginning. But faces pop up and you're like, I know that guy. And a lot of the Asian cast is very strong of presence as well as part of this movie. And that's the thing about this movie. Once we get into the actual battle itself, we jump back and forth between the opposing sides, and neither side is pushed forward as being like some sort of cackling evil character and all that, so which you would normally see as one or the other being like the devil sort of character and all that, but they're both treated very respectfully towards their cultures, towards their goals and all that sort of thing. And it's just a fantastic collection of fantastic actors from top to bottom in this whole entire list. The movie itself, actually, at the beginning, mentions that they actually use actual archival footage from the actual battle at Midway that they splice into this movie. We have a bunch of rear screen projections. We have a lot of pyrotechnics being used in this, with miniatures blowing up and whatnot, but it's definitely takes the idea of bringing the reality of war as best as they can at the time to the viewing audience. Also, where sometimes it could be confusing when you see just a ship out in the water, or you see a plane flying through the air and you have no idea who this is. They actually do give you like a little title cards. Hey, this is this person in this plane, or this is the battleship that you're looking at, and whatnot. And they, when you jump back and forth, it makes a lot more sense to point out to probably an audience that would not be able to decipher the difference between the American and the Japanese fleets. But like I mentioned, some of that archival footage that they have is quite brutal, and we actually have a couple of like actual planes as they're coming into land, like crashing on the top of the launch decks as they try and land, and then splicing in your actors being pulled out of the wreckage and whatnot. Planes crashing and burning on the thing, but then we actually have like miniatures blowing up and whatnot for the spectacular effects and all that, and makes for quite an entertaining but still realistic feeling movie. And it's when the carrier, the Enterprise, with its Hornets, arrive at Pearl Harbor on June 13th, 1942. And that happens 2 hours and 7 minutes into this 2 hour and 12-minute movie. And as it is the 14th of June, we are going to be watching The Sand Pebbles from 1966, directed by Robert Wise and starring Stephen McQueen. So this is one of those movies where I know of the title. I understand it is a war-era movie and it stars Steve McQueen, but as far as that, I really had no idea what this movie really entitled. Again, seeing it on several lists of war movies, and other than that, knew nothing about it until this obviously being my first watch. And as I previously mentioned, not only does this movie star Steve McQueen, but it also stars Richard Attenborough, Richard Crenna, Candice Bergen, Emmanuel Arsan, Mako, Joe Turkel, and Gavin McLeod. In 1926, the U.S. San Pablo patrols the Yangtze River between the clash between Chiang Kai-shek's communists and the Chinese warlords, when the 8-year veteran machinist Jake Holman, played by Steve McQueen, who is new to the self-named Pebbles crew, immediately draws deep suspicion due to his independent streak. In order to protect the Americans, including schoolteacher Shirley Eckhart, played by Candice Bergen, Jake and the gunboat crew are unwittingly drawn into a bitter nationalistic feud that holds grim consequences. So to begin with, while again, knowing this was a wartime movie, I really wasn't sure of the conflict that had actually happened. And obviously, as we're dealing with the 1926 storyline, it definitely depicts of what's going on. This movie is something that I never really expected from a 3-hour plus film from 1966. It was, while it is a Steve McQueen-led movie, I expected more of a Steve McQueen sort of thing. Now, I know that is kind of a contradiction in sort of terms to an extent, but the feeling of this movie was, it was going along at the regular pace of a movie that I expected. Then we just took a very bizarre turn. There is a incident that happens that turns out to be a lot more graphic than I was really expecting. I mean, it's not horribly graphic, but for the time, it definitely was a shocking thing to be witnessing as a major movie release, to show this particular scene, to indulge on it, but it just shocked me. And then as the movie continues on, it turns down this not very normal Hollywood storyline. Now, of course, it's not a Hollywood depiction of this thing, but it seems more grounds root and very visceral and there is a lot to this movie that I wasn't expecting to see. There's a lot more actual physical graphic violence between characters, where we have some lightheartedness at the beginning that turns into this tragic, almost like devastating ending to this movie. And again, something that I was definitely not expecting to picture from this particular movie, making it a fascinating watch. And the time does not feel like a 3-hour movie, because as we progress through this movie, you just get drawn in by the drama and the happenstance of not only the crew themselves, but the atmosphere around them, that they find themselves practically trapped in this conflict going on between these huge forces, that they're just trying to basically kind of keep their heads literally above water to try and live through this sequence, which unfortunately turns into a very dark ending for this story. Once he is mostly accustomed to how things are running on this particular ship, Jake Coleman starts to settle in as the new ship's mechanic for the engine, training a new, what they call a coolie, as a native helping out the team to run the ship. And the ship itself starts what they call a show the flag cruise, which actually begins on June 14th, 1926, which is about 32 minutes into this 3-hour and 16-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it ended up getting nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Steve McQueen, Best Supporting Actor for Mako, Best Color Set Decorator, Best Color Cinematography, Best Film Editor, Best Sound, and Best Original Score. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this particular episode and look off to the future, see what we're going to be watching for tomorrow, which is going to be the 15th of June, and that is going to be Barry Lyndon from 1975. So until next time, go see a movie. And as it is the 15th of June, we are going to be watching Barry Lyndon from 1975, directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Ryan O'Neal. So when it comes to Stanley Kubrick movies, this is probably one of like 2 or 3 that I haven't gotten around to seeing. So while I do know about this movie, and I'm pretty sure I knew about what the story was going into, as I have listened to countless podcasts and whatnot talking about the catalog of Stanley Kubrick, and this movie obviously comes up, but I had not actually seen it until this project. And like I already mentioned, not only does this movie star Ryan O'Neal, but it also stars Marissa Berenson, Patrick McGee, Hardy Kruger, Gay Hamilton, Leanne Vitali, and Michael Hordern. So while this movie is actually based on an adaptation of William Makepeace's Thackeray's novel, in which a likable Irishman, played by Ryan O'Neal, changes into a conniving, manipulative rogue. The protagonist finds himself homeless after taking part in a fake duel, and he's then captured by Parisian highwaymen and meets up with spies, but his fortune changes when he marries a wealthy titled woman in order to secure his future. And to be quite honest, that's just the bare bones of this movie. So like I'd mentioned, this is a Stanley Kubrick movie that I never got around to watching until now, and it is definitely later in Stanley Kubrick's movies. I believe this is his 4th last movie. This just basically after A Clockwork Orange. His next movie to be The Shining several years later. But it is a big, epic tale of this young man, like I said, played by Ryan O'Neal. Just interesting, as he plays an Irishman with a completely UK cast. So he's the only American within this. And he does a half decent of it, using the accent throughout. He actually adopts different voices as well, depending on the situation. And we basically deal with him going through all these trials and tribulations after, again, having to leave home at a young age and then running into thieves and then meeting up with Persians. And it's just a long, drawn-out story. And unfortunately, at times it does feel like the 3 hours is playing out. At the intermission, which this movie does have, I was all like, crap, I've still got more of this movie to go, which was not a usual thing for me. But visually, it has all the hallmarks of a Kubrick film. The great visuals, amazing camera work. He pulls out great performances from all these actors, a lot of which that I did not or had not known about. There were one or two faces that are like, I remember that guy from that guy, or hey, isn't that her from this? But again, dealing with Ryan O'Neal as our central character that we're following through, it's a very interesting story that's being told. And well, like I said, it does seem it's 3+ hours, but at the end, I was finally glad to get around to seeing this, as it is definitely a display of Kubrick's work. And it is actually slightly after that intermission I just mentioned where Redmond, who again is Ryan O'Neal under a different name, he adopts different names throughout this whole entire story, marries Lady Lyndon after her elderly husband dies, which is about an hour and 42 minutes into this 3-hour and 4-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that season, it actually ended up winning for Best Set Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, and Best Music, and ended up getting nominations for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And as it is the 16th of June, we are watching Windtalkers from 2002, directed by John Woo and starring Nicolas Cage. So to begin with, I have seen this movie. It wasn't something that I actually went out and decided to watch on my own validity. It was part of a apartment-wide rental. We had a mom and pop shop below the apartment building that we lived in, and we would frequently watch several movies throughout a weekend. And this was one of those titles. Again, me not being a huge Nicolas Cage fan, I believe the main reason that we got this movie was because of the fact that it is a John Woo picture. And like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Nicolas Cage, but it also stars Adam Beach, Roger Willie, Peter Stormare, Noah Emmerich, Mark Ruffalo, and Christian Slater. So, Marine Joe Enders, played by Nicolas Cage, is assigned to protect Ben Yanzi, who is played by Adam Beach, a Navajo code talker, the Marines' new secret weapon. Enders' orders are to protect his code talker, and if Yanzi would fall into enemy hands, he is to protect the code at all costs. Against the backdrop of the horrific Battle of Saipan, when capture is imminent, Enders is forced to make a decision. If he can't protect his fellow Marine, can he bring himself to kill to protect the code? So begin with, this is another movie in John Woo's lexicon of American quote-unquote version of movies. Like early, he did Face Off with Nicolas Cage, followed by Broken Arrow with Christian Slater, and then eventually having those two actors combine their forces for this particular film. Now we're dealing with the effects of being in World War II. We definitely have a very interesting cast. We have a lot of faces that pop up that are like, oh, I didn't realize he was in this movie. Mainly when Mark Ruffalo's name popped up on the opening credits, I'm like, whoa, I don't remember Mark Ruffalo being in this movie. But that aside, it's a very cool little action film. Not really little as in like it's a tiny scale. It's huge scale. Just pyrotechnics alone are like astronomical in the effects that they do. This is very action oriented John Woo for sure. He doesn't do a lot of the gun-fu violence that he usually does. It's centered in more of a reality, but the uses of, like I said, pyrotechnics, there's a lot of gunplay. There are squibs galore being used in this. Fantastic stunts, like stuntmen being thrown from explosions from either landmines or tossed hand grenades or something like that. A lot of really cool fire effects, and this is definitely a stunt-oriented film when it comes to the visuals, that's for sure. When it comes down to the basics of the story, it's a very really cool insight into this portion of the Americans trying to get one up on the enemy, using the Navajos to basically send out radio transmissions in their language in code, and it's impossible for the Japanese to like even translate it from what they are understanding of what basically they hear. Oh, again, we're dealing with a Nicolas Cage-led film, so you get Nicolas Cage acting. He works as a very formidable lead in this role, a career Marine who, after a very what should be career-ending injury, strives to come back to get himself back involved in the war. And like I said, while this movie does happen during the conflict on Saipan, this is the day that they actually show up, which happens to be on June 16th, 1944, which is about 33 minutes into this 2-hour and 14-minute movie. And as it is the 17th of June, we are watching A Dry White Season from 1989, directed by Uzan Pulsi and starring Donald Sutherland. So to be completely honest, well, I do know this is a movie about apartheid and whatnot, but I was unaware of the actual movie itself. And when looking through the actual cast, I'm like, why do I not know about this movie further? But again, this would be obviously a first time watching this movie. And like I had just previously mentioned, not only does this movie star Donald Sutherland, but it also stars Janet Sussman, Jürgen Prochnow, Marlon Brando, Susanna Harker, Zakes Moquet, and Susan Sarandon. Teacher Ben DeToit, played by Donald Sutherland, mostly ignores the problems of apartheid in South Africa until he discovers that the son of his gardener, played by Winston Stoda, at his school has been killed by corrupt policeman Stoltz, played by Jürgen Prochnow. DeToit persuades human rights attorney Ian McKenzie, played by Marlon Brando, to try a long-shot case against Stoltz. During the trial, DeToit's transformation into an advocate for justice is so absolute that it distances him from his family. So again, it's because we're dealing with the time of the history that this all falls into, how we just recently did another apartheid themed movie, Invictus, with Morgan Freeman a little while ago. This one is more in your face because it's actually during the actual events going on and how severely distraught the actual situation was. Now, again, I'm an outsider speaking upon looking back on history through a movie, and while I'm sure that I was alive during this time, I was a North American sheltered from most of this thing, or just a teenager that didn't really look beyond his own existence at the time. And going back and from the future looking back at stuff that was happening back when I was a child, it's just a very disturbing sort of a situation to have known that this is what was going on, this is what was happening. The movie does not hold back on any of the violence. There is several child deaths during this. There's torture, and shown graphically too. Not horrific, but just enough of it is there to really hit home the impact of the visuals of this movie. The lead of having a Donald Sutherland doing a fantastic job in this movie just puts it home. And again, the African cast also lending a fabulous job to this. We have Marlon Brando doing late 80s Marlon Brando acting, but it does have an impact the way that he performs during his few scenes that he's in. And it's a movie that I really had no idea existed, but I'm glad that this project brought me to watching this very well done and very well structured movie. And after the opening events that happen in the movie, Mr. DeToit reads about the subsequent riots that happen from the previous day, and he reads about this in the paper on June 17th, 1976, which is about 19 minutes into this 1 hour and 37-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that season, it actually ended up getting nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Marlon Brando. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this particular episode and look off to the future to see what we're going to be watching for tomorrow, which is going to be the 18th of June, and that is going to be Disclosure from 1994. So until next time, go see a movie.
This has been A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. Please be sure to subscribe, download, comment, share, rate, and review. Once again, another thanks to Ivan Walters for his book, A Year of Movies, 365 Films to Watch on the Day They Happened. Look for it online or at your local bookstore. Follow Planet Geek Productions on all of our social media. Through Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, and Letterboxd, search for Planet Geek Productions. On X, former Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, search for Planet Geek Pod. You can also reach out to us through email at planetgeekpod@gmail.com. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, go see a movie.